You've spent your whole life believing that finding the one, your true love, would be the pinnacle of your spiritual journey. Radiant couples walking hand in hand toward a cosmic sunset, twin flames recognizing each other across the ages. But Alan Watts discovered something disturbing. The more spiritually awake you become, the less you're able to fall in love the way society has taught you to desire. And that's not a defect, it's exactly what should be happening. There's a silent paradox that no one tells you about spiritual awakening, that moment when you finally start to see through the illusions of the ego, to feel the interconnectedness of all things, to dissolve the boundaries between yourself and the universe. You expect it to make you more capable of love, more open, more connected. But the opposite happens. You look at the people around you, searching for romantic love with the same urgency as someone drowning, gasping for air. And you no longer feel that desperate hunger. That need that used to consume you simply disappears, and then comes the fear. What's wrong with me? Have I lost my capacity to love? Have I become cold, inhuman? The solitude you choose begins to feel like a curse instead of a liberation. You see couples in love and feel a cosmic distance between you and them, as if you were on the other side of a thick pane of glass, observing a dance you can no longer dance. Not because you don't want to, but because you can no longer pretend the dance is real. Alan Watts spent years studying this phenomenon. Why do monks choose celibacy? Why do mystics of all traditions often walk alone? Why does the more you awaken, the further you move away from the kind of love that movies romanticize? He discovered that it's not because love disappears, it's because love transforms into something that most people wouldn't even recognize as love. Here's the first truth that will dissolve something within you. What you called love before awakening was mostly need disguised. You didn't love the person. You loved how they filled the void in your ego, how they validated your existence, how they made you feel less alone in the terrifying vastness of the universe. Alan Watts said, "We don't fall in love with people. We fall in love with the feeling of no longer being this lonely, separate self." Think about it. When you were deeply in love before awakening, what did you really love? Was it the person in all their imperfect, changing humanity? Or was it the idea of them, the projection you created, the role they played in the movie of your life? You loved how they looked at you in a certain way that made your ego feel special, how they filled the deafening silence of your separate existence, how they gave you a reason not to face the emptiness of your own being. And when that person inevitably failed to continue filling that void, when they revealed themselves to be human instead of the god or goddess you projected onto them, love transformed into resentment, into pain, into desperate attachment or cold detachment, because it was never really about them. It was always about you trying to escape from yourself. Now, something has changed. You've awakened enough to see through that illusion. You've realized that the void you were trying to fill with another person was never a void at all. It was the very nature of existence. It was the infinite space in which all things arise and disappear. And when you stop trying to fill that space, when you relax into it instead of fighting against it, something extraordinary happens. You stop needing another person to complete you, because you realize that you were never incomplete. And it's exactly here that the cruel paradox manifests. The moment you stop desperately needing love, you also stop feeling that burning, obsessive passion that society has taught you to call true love. The songs stop making sense. The romantic movies seem like stories about people trapped in illusions you've transcended. You look at couples on their honeymoon, radiant with the intensity of newfound passion. And you see clearly the future suffering written between the lines of that temporary happiness. You see two egos trying to merge. without realizing that the fusion they seek is only possible when both egos completely dissolve. Hold on, because the real paradox is coming now. Alan Watts realized that awakening doesn't kill love. It kills the neurotic need disguised as love. And in the space left by that need, something much vaster can arise. But that something doesn't look anything like what you've been conditioned to desire. It doesn't have the addictive intensity of passion. It doesn't have the drama of fights and reconciliations. It doesn't have the feeling of being hopelessly in love, because to be lost, you need an ego that can get lost, and the ego is dissolving. What arises in its place is a quality of love that's almost impossible to describe to someone who's still trapped in the old way of loving. It's like trying to describe the color blue to someone born blind. You can use the words compassion, presence, acceptance, but none of them fully capture it, because this love isn't directed at a specific person you've chosen as special. It flows naturally in all directions, like sunlight that doesn't choose which flowers to shine on. And here's the cruel paradox that makes awakened people choose solitude. Most people are still operating on the old model of love as need. When they say, "I love you," what they really mean is, "I need you to fill my void." They want intensity, exclusivity, possession disguised as romance. They want you to be the protagonist in the movie of their life, and they get hurt when you refuse to play that role. You, awakened, can no longer play that game, not because you've become cold or superior, but because you see through it with too much clarity. It's as if everyone is watching a dramatic movie, completely absorbed in the story, crying and laughing with the characters, and you're sitting there, seeing the blank screen behind the projected images. You can still appreciate the movie, but you can no longer forget that it's just a movie. So what happens? You try to relate in the old Wayland because that's what's expected of you. You meet someone. She's pretty, intelligent, interesting. You should fall in love, but that urgency isn't there. That fear of losing the person doesn't arise. That obsession that used to consume you doesn't appear, and the person notices. She feels that you're present, but not needy. She feels that you love her in a quiet, broad way, but not with the desperate intensity that she's been conditioned to desire. And then she says, "You don't really love me." And technically, she's right. You don't love her the way she defines real. You haven't placed her on some impossible pedestal. You're not willing to suffer dramatically for her. You don't need her to feel complete. And to her ego, which has been trained to confuse need with love, this feels like coldness. Alan Watts faced this repeatedly in his own life. He married 3 times, loved deeply, but there was always a quality to his love that people found hard to grasp. He loved without attachment. He appreciated without possessing. He was present without being bound. And this confounded those around him who were still operating in the old paradigm, the old way of thinking. In one of his lectures, he said something that cuts like a Zen blade. The more you try to hold water in a closed fist, the more it slips through your fingers. But when you relax your hand and let the water simply rest there, it can stay for as long as it naturally will. This is the secret of true love, not holding on, not gripping, just being present while the moment allows. But here's the thing, most people don't want this kind of love. They want the closed fist. They want guarantees. They want to hear, "I'll never leave you." They want eternal promises from a self that doesn't even permanently exist. And when you, having woken up, can't offer those comforting illusions, you seem incapable of love. So, you withdraw, not with bitterness, but with a gentle understanding that you and most people are speaking different languages when they talk about love. You choose solitude not as an escape, but as the only honest space available. Because being alone is actually less lonely than being with someone and having to constantly pretend to feel things you don't feel anymore. And this is where the second revelation happens, one that Alan Watts considered crucial. The solitude of the awakened isn't empty. It's full, in a way that defies description. When you stop seeking completeness in another person, you begin to realize that you were never separate from anything. The feeling of being a solitary self, isolated in an indifferent universe, was the illusion. The truth is, you are the universe experiencing itself through this particular form. You are alone in the same way the ocean is alone. Technically true, if you consider only the salt water, but completely false when you realize that the ocean is inseparable from all the currents, all the fish, all the waves, the entire water cycle, the clouds, the rain. The ocean is never alone. It is totality manifested in a specific form. You, awakened, begin to feel this, not intellectually, viscerally. You walk through a forest, and you don't feel like you are observing the forest. You are the consciousness through which the forest is experiencing itself. You look into the eyes of a stranger, and for a moment the veil dissolves, and you realize that it's the same gaze looking back at itself through two different masks. And in that space of expanded perception, the old model of romantic love seems incredibly limited. It's like someone offering you a drop of water when you've just realized that you are the entire ocean. It's not that the drop is bad, but the urge to possess it has vanished. Here's the most disturbing twist. Alan Watts discovered that awakened people often need to choose between two paths. The first is to find another awakened person who operates on the same expanded frequency of love, someone who loves without need, who is present without attachment, who understands that the greatest gift two beings can give each other is total freedom. But these encounters are rare, incredibly rare. It's like two meteors needing to collide in the vacuum of space, mathematically possible, practically improbable. The second path is conscious solitude, not the bitter loneliness of someone who's been rejected, but the chosen solitude of someone who's realized that being alone is being with everything. It's being free from the exhaustion of maintaining masks, of performing love the way others expect, of pretending that you still believe in the romantic stories that the culture sold you. And most awakened people choose the second path, not because they've given up on love, but because they've realized something that Alan Watts tried to communicate for decades. The love you seek outside of yourself, in another person, is a search that can never be satisfied, while you still believe that you are a separate self, looking for another separate self to complete you. Think of this as a modern koan. How can you complete something that was never incomplete? How can you unite with someone when you've never been separate from anything? The very desire for romantic union is born from the illusion of separation. And when the illusion of separation begins to dissolve through awakening, the burning desire for union also dissolves, not because you've stopped loving, but because you've realized that the union you were seeking is already the fundamental reality of every moment. You might be thinking that you understand this intellectually, but just wait. There's a difference between understanding this as a philosophical concept and experiencing it as a felt reality. Many people on the spiritual path confuse the two and end up using concepts of non-attachment as an excuse for emotional coldness. They say, "I don't get attached because I'm awakened," when in reality they're simply afraid of intimacy. Alan Watts was very clear about this crucial distinction. True awakening doesn't make you cold. It doesn't make you indifferent. It doesn't turn you into a spiritual robot. who looks at human suffering and says, everything is an illusion, so nothing matters. That's misunderstood spirituality. That's the ego using spiritual concepts to protect itself from vulnerability. True awakening makes you incredibly sensitive, almost painfully open. You feel everything with more intensity, not less. But there's a different quality to that feeling. There's no resistance. There's no story that this shouldn't be happening. There's just pure feeling, without the ego's narrative trying to control or avoid the experience. So, when a genuine awakened person chooses solitude, it's not because they've stopped feeling, it's because they feel too much. They feel the pain of the people around them, trying to love each other through the bars of their false identities. They feel the unnecessary suffering generated by relationships based on need instead of wholeness. And they can no longer participate in that game without feeling like they're betraying something fundamental within themselves. Here's another layer to this paradox that's going to make you pause. Hold on to this because it'll make sense when you realize it. Alan Watts taught that awakening isn't a destination. It's an ongoing process of seeing through illusions. And one of the most persistent illusions is the illusion of the awakened one. What does this mean? It means that the moment you think, I'm awake and others aren't, you've created a new form of ego, a spiritual identity that's even more subtle and dangerous than the common ego. Because now you have an ego that disguises itself as non-ego. You have a sense of spiritual superiority that looks at radiant couples and thinks, poor souls, still trapped in the illusion. And that's exactly the kind of trap so many on the spiritual path fall into. They stop falling in love, and instead of seeing it as a natural phase of dissolving old patterns, they transform it into a new identity. I'm too spiritually awake for banal, romantic love. I've transcended the need for relationships. I'm special because I see through the illusions that others still believe. Alan Watts would laugh at this trap because he knew that true spiritual awakening includes seeing through the illusion of being awake. It's what Zen masters call not knowing. It's a radical openness where you don't even cling to the idea of having transcended anything. So maybe the question isn't why spiritually awakened people stop falling in love. Maybe the question is, what happens when you stop identifying as awake or not awake and simply allow love to be what it is in each moment, without labeling it, without comparing it to what it was before, without making it evidence of your spiritual evolution or lack thereof. And here, right here, is the insight that Alan Watts considered revolutionary. True love doesn't need a reason. It doesn't need a purpose. It doesn't need to validate your spiritual journey or prove that you've transcended anything. It just is, like the sun that shines effortlessly, like the heart that beats without you having to think about it, like the breath that flows without conscious command. When you stop trying to make love mean something about you, about your evolution, about your spiritual status, something extraordinary becomes possible. You can love without an agenda, without fear, without the need for that love to validate your existence or prove your worth. You can simply appreciate another human being, as you appreciate a sunset, not because they complete you, but because there's a natural beauty in witnessing life in its infinite forms. But what if that never happens? What if you choose solitude and stay in it for the rest of your life? Alan Watts would say, so what? Who said a life needs to include a romantic relationship to be complete? That's another cultural illusion you can dissolve. The idea that there's a correct formula for life, that you need to find the one, that being alone is failure. The truth is that some of the most spiritually fulfilled people in history walked alone, not because they couldn't find anyone, but because the fullness they discovered in themselves was so vast that adding another person to the mix would be redundant, not necessary, neither good nor bad, just unnecessary. And there's an incredible freedom in realizing that you don't need anything or anyone to be complete. It's not a nihilistic coldness that says nothing matters. It's a fullness that recognizes that everything is already here. Everything you were looking for in another is already available in the very nature of the consciousness that you are. But Alan Watts always came back to this crucial point. Realizing you don't need a relationship is very different from avoiding a relationship. One comes from fullness, the other comes from fear, and it's easy to confuse the two. It's easy to use spirituality as an excuse not to risk yourself in the vulnerability that genuine relationships require. So how do you know the difference? How do you know if you've chosen solitude out of genuine spiritual awakening or out of fear disguised as spiritual wisdom? Alan Watts had a simple test. Look at your solitude. Is it light? Is it spacious? Do you feel at peace even when there's no one there to validate your existence? Or is there a subtle tension, a fear of intimacy, an invisible armor that you've built around your heart and are calling detachment? The solitude of the genuinely awakened isn't defensive. It doesn't protect anything. It doesn't avoid anything. It simply recognizes that in this moment, in this form, life is expressing itself through the experience of being alone, and that's enough. Not because you've convinced yourself that it's enough, but because you've viscerally realized that enough isn't even the right word. There's a quality of radical okayness with what is, and paradoxically, it's exactly when you reach that state of total okayness with solitude that true love becomes possible. Not love based on need, but a love that flows from the excess of being, like a fruit tree that doesn't produce fruit because it needs something in return. It simply overflows with what's natural to it. So maybe spiritually awakened people don't stop falling in love. Maybe they just stop confusing attachment with love, need with intimacy, fear of loneliness with genuine connection. And in the space left by that confusion, something much deeper can happen. Or not. And both are perfectly okay. You've just dissolved the illusion that romantic love defines a meaningful life. You've seen that what society calls the one is often need disguised as love. You've realized that spiritual awakening transforms not just how you love, but who you think you are. And this truth about conscious solitude isn't something many channels explore with this depth. Alan Watts dedicated decades studying Eastern and Western philosophy to reveal these paradoxes. Each video like this requires diving into teachings that modern culture has forgotten, that the algorithm rarely promotes, that most people avoid because it challenges everything they've been conditioned to believe about love and relationships. The super thanks down there isn't just financial support. It's you saying, this truth about transformed love resonated with me. It's you validating that there's space for deep philosophical conversations about themes that culture trivializes. When you click that golden heart, you become part of a community that chooses paradox instead of easy answers, that chooses truth instead of comfort. You're not just a spectator. You're a seeker of a deeper understanding of love, of solitude, of what it means to be truly alive. Together, we're exploring what Alan Watts spent his life trying to communicate, that the greatest revolution isn't changing the world out there, but dissolving the illusions here inside. Now, how do you live this? How do you integrate this understanding that spiritual awakening transforms love into something unrecognizable? First, stop judging yourself. If you're at this point in the journey where romantic love doesn't move you in the old way anymore, It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It means you're seeing through a deep cultural illusion. Honor that. Secondly, don't use your spiritual awakening as armor. Just because you see through the illusion of conventional romantic love doesn't mean you should shut down your heart. True wisdom is about being fully open while being completely detached from the outcome. It's being able to love deeply without needing that love to be eternal, without needing it to complete you, without needing it to prove anything about you. Thirdly, observe the difference between chosen solitude and isolation based on fear. Conscious solitude is light. It breathes. It can shift at any moment if life presents someone who operates on the same expanded frequency. Isolation based on fear is rigid. It's defensive. It's, I chose this and I need to prove I chose correctly. By keeping everyone at a distance. Alan Watts lived this imperfectly. He was married 3 times. He drank. He had complex relationships. He wasn't a saint on a pedestal. And perhaps that's exactly why his teachings are so valuable. He wasn't speaking from an ivory tower of spiritual perfection. He was speaking from the human confusion of trying to live authentically in a world that sells illusions as truths. So, here's the Zen practice for you to integrate. Over the next few days, observe your judgments about love. When you see a radiant couple, what happens? Do you feel superiority because you see through their illusion? Or do you feel a genuine tenderness for 2 consciousnesses playing in the game of love, knowing that eventually they'll awaken to something greater, or they won't, and both are perfectly okay? When you feel alone, what's the quality of that solitude? Is there fear? Is there a voice that says you should be doing something different? Or is there a peace that recognizes that this moment of being alone is just as sacred as any moment of being accompanied? And if someone appears in your life and you feel a genuine attraction, can you allow it? Without needing to turn it into a story, without needing to know if it's going to last forever, without needing it to validate your spiritual journey or prove that you've finally found the one. The freedom that Alan Watts pointed to isn't the freedom to never feel again. It's the freedom to feel everything without clinging to anything. It's being able to fall deeply in love and at the same time recognize that even that love is a temporary dance of consciousness, experiencing itself, and perhaps the greatest paradox of all. When you truly awaken to your nature as pure consciousness, you realize that you never stopped loving. You simply stopped confusing love with all the stories and expectations and needs that the ego attaches to it. Love has always been here, like the space in which everything happens, like the consciousness that witnesses all experiences, without being touched by any of them. You are the love you were looking for, not as a self-help cliché, but as a verifiable truth through your own experience. When you sit in silence and stop looking for love outside, you realize that the very ability to be conscious, to witness, to be, is love in its purest form. Love without an object, love without a subject, just love happening. And from that place, if you find someone or if you walk alone, both become equally valid expressions of love. Not because you've convinced yourself of it, but because you've seen through the illusion that one way of life is more spiritual or more evolved than another. So yes, spiritually awake people often stop falling in love in the conventional way, but they don't stop loving. They've just discovered that love is what you are, not what you do or feel or seek. And that discovery, according to Alan Watts, is the true awakening, not an event, but a continuous recognition of the love that has always been the fundamental nature of existence. Now tell me in the comments, Do you also feel that the more spiritually awake you become, the less you can fall in love in the old way? Or do you completely disagree and think that spiritual awakening should intensify romantic love? Let's have that honest conversation about something that few talk about: the price and the gift of seeing through the illusions of love.